So this is the second of a series of 3 sermons that I'm talking about the church's response to social issues. And I picked these 3 social issues loosely from the survey that was circulated within the congregation. And this one focuses on those kind of social issues that have to do with sociological inequity, the growing inequities between the rich and the poor, and a host of that kind of swirl. When I first came to Greensboro in 1991, the first job I had was working at an organization called the North Carolina Poverty Project. So I was about 45, and the guy that the head honcho of the North, it was his organization, was an 81-year-old guy, and I had a hard time keeping up with the dude. He ran, and he was a night owl, and I'm a morning person. So he and I finally agreed we could meet between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I wasn't too tired, and he was awake. But he only had one thing to say: poverty is a structural problem. It is not because the people that are poor are stupid, ignorant, or dumb. It is a sociological, structural problem. And he was always, he'd talk to anybody about sociological, structural problems. And today, that's what I want to look at. I want to look at how we, as a congregation, be self-conscious of the structures that cause problems. So last time, in the last sermon, I focused on stories and songs, and how stories and songs can help change your relationship to the natural world. Stories and songs can also help change your relationship to the poor of the planet also. And structures can also help with the environment. And next time I'm going to focus on personal demonstrations, how demonstrations of new possibilities, and those apply for all 3. But today I want to focus on structures, and particularly how a congregation like this can become self-conscious of its structures, and that changing structures is a religious task, because it takes a huge amount of self-conscious spiritual depth to do something, especially when it involves sociological rebalancing. That's the whole thing, but going back. So that reading I did on this 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, that's haunted me. Now, I've been around the world. I've seen most parts. I've seen some of the 2.5. I've seen the 2. I've seen the 1, and I've seen the 1.5. So this is the core of the problem, and we have a structural problem that's causing that. And part of the reason that I moved back to the United States was because I was aware that this country, as a country, causes part of the global structural imbalance. My one example, we lived in this little village called Chickalee, and we had the only 4-wheel drive vehicle in town, the Jeep. And I was one of the few people who could drive the Jeep, and I would drive into Bombay, which I did periodically. So that's courage. But anyway. So one day I said, okay, I'm going into Bombay today, and Elaine, my wife Elaine, said, hey, listen, on your way back, would you stop by Don Bosco High School and pick up 2 bags of powdered milk? Well, I'm a person who always does whatever his wife says. Nobody believes. Yeah, right? So I didn't know it existed. So I went and did my business, and then I'm driving back out, and I come by Don Bosco High School. It's a big Catholic church, monstrous place. And you drive in, and finally I found out. And sure enough, there was a man there, and I told him who I was. Okay. And he puts 2 50-pound bags of powdered milk in the back of the Jeep. And they're labeled in big letters, compliments of the United States government. And I'm driving home and I'm thinking on the way home. Now, the way we had the work divided up in Chickale Village, Elaine worked with the women and children, and I worked with the men in the village, because that's not the place to start to deal with gender inequality right off the bat. So, and she was doing a preschool. They had a preschool. Lots of little kids came, and they wanted to give nutritious milk to the children. That's a good thing. I was trying to start a dairy, and I was trying to work with the farmers, and we just could not get a viable, economically viable business model for expanding the dairy herd, because there was nobody to buy the milk. Well, the most likely people to buy the milk are the poor little kids who are going to the preschool. So the United States government, in its great wisdom, which buys milk from the farmers so that the price of milk stays high, and then the U.S. government, who has all this milk, which they don't know what to do with, they dry it. Now, some of it they use for hurricane relief, and the rest, what do? They ship it around the world and give it to poor people, which is a noble goal, but it makes starting a dairy in Chickale impossible, because there's no market, because there's free milk. So this has haunted me for a long time. This is my example of a structural problem. And everybody in the process was well intended. But it's a structural problem. We have to look for those kind of things. Now, I'm all for charity. I'm all for helping poor people. And I just want to say, if you haven't gone and cooked breakfast at the IRC, if you haven't done that, you should. It's one of the best things this congregation does, and it's an eye-opening experience, and it's absolutely necessary. Okay? I don't want to make it sound like that's a very important. It's a structure, way we care. It's important. But I want to talk about structures and social structures today. I have to step back a little bit. One of the things, I like to look at the universe and sort of say, how does the universe solve its problems? What's it do? And one of the things that I notice when I look around the universe is the universe does not like wide disparities. Lightning is a result of wide disparity. A lot of electrons up here, not very many electrons down here. There will be lightning jump. Hurricanes are the result of a big disparity. Warm water trying to go up, cold water trying to come down. There will be a hurricane. And earthquakes. Earthquakes are the result of a big disparity. Now, the universe likes to solve things by solving little disparities. The cool summer breeze is also a disparity. There's a little bit of extra warm air over here going up and the cold air coming down. But as long as it's within balance, we call it a cool summer breeze. When it gets out of control, we call it a tornado. And so the universe, there's a lot of examples of widening disparity is a sign of you better start to look for caution, because something's going to give. And one of my old boss, my first boss that I talked about, he used to say, he would try to say to people, the single best predictor of sociological unrest is to watch the gap between the rich and the poor. The wider the gap, if that gap is getting wider, the social unrest will get wider. And it's pretty simple. So we have a situation today when that gap is starting to become cataclysmic. And I don't want to belabor that point. What I want to try to look for is what are some options? What can we do here? What can a group like this do? So social structures are important. In my own house, we divide up the task between finance and food. So Elaine's responsible for food. I'm responsible for finances. That's a big cut. It works fine. Now on the food side, we have a little sheet of paper that lays on the countertop. It's called the grocery list. And if you're the last person to use the mustard and it goes and you realize this mustard bottle's about empty, you write mustard on the list. Otherwise, if you don't, and if I don't do that, then she has to go look at every single bottle in every single shelf. So we have this is a structure that solves a really good problem. We have enough groceries always. Things run out, you write them down. And if you didn't write it down, you can't complain about the fact that it ain't there. It's a good structure. That's structure solving problems. And structures do solve problems. They can cause problems too, but without structure, you don't have a chance. I'll come to how to change structures in a minute. So, I read about the Benedictine monastery and their rule. My encounter with monastery structure was in Perth, Australia. I used to have to drive out of Perth to visit a supporter of ours, and I came to find out that there was a Benedictine monastery that was just about as far out of town as you could get by the time it was lunchtime. And if you stopped there, you could always have lunch with the Benedictines. Now, the big advantage of lunch with the Benedictines is they serve wine with every meal. So but the way they sat they always sat at the same table, big U-shaped table, and I was always invited to sit down at the lower end of the U. And they told me one time that the way they sit at the table was the abbot and the assistant sit at the head. And after that, they sit in order of when you joined the monastery, the oldest to the youngest. That's how they sit. Now the food is always put on the table at the far end, where the youngest, newest guy to the monastery sits. That's where all the food is placed and passed up to the abbot. And they said they started that back in the days when there wasn't enough food. And some days there just wasn't enough food for everybody. But the abbot is the one that's going to get the plate last. And you can imagine the day when there wasn't much rice. And even if the new guy at the bottom says, well, I'll be generous and won't take very much, if he takes 2 grains, well, if there's 10 grains of rice on the plate, or a half a cup, by the time it gets to the abbot, there's not going to be nothing left. But that's a structural way to solve food inequity. And the abbot, if there's no food, he better be sitting there thinking about how we're going to get food for the monastery. Because that's his job. So structures. What does the universe do when it gets itself in a bind that it can't figure out quite how to take the next step? My answer is the universe gets organized, and it organizes more complexly than it was before. What do I mean by that? Well, the simplest example is single-celled animals. Single-celled animals, they were all over the place. But there became a time when a bunch of single-celled animals said, you know what? If we got organized, we could be something new. We would be a multicellular animal. And when that happened, a whole new form of life happened on the planet. And we are, in my opinion, at that kind of time again. We have gotten as far as the human species can go with the strategy of you be good, 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 I'll be good, and we'll all be good. That will not work on planet Earth anymore. We'll have that conversation some other time. That's my contention. The last great invention for the human species, I get the chance to just make some claims, and then we'll go back and sort out the details. But the last great invention of the human species was in the American and French revolutions. And basically, that came out of the Enlightenment and the result of the work in the monasteries and that. But basically, these are structures that allow individuals to live and work together and be better individuals. And we are now, something new is required. We are now at a time when we as a species have to figure out ways to work together in ways that allow our species and all the other species to function on the planet. And that requires new sets of understandings and new kinds of structures. And I'm of a long-standing perspective that that's a religious problem, that takes a kind of circumspect reflection, that takes personal discipline, that takes thinking in new kinds of ways. And that's why I'm excited to be with groups like this, because we have the possibility. What would that look like for us? The gap between the rich and the poor. And I started thinking, when you come to this church, you can count on three things. If you get through the door, you can have a cup of coffee, a warm smile, and some more or less meaningful experience. Or at least the people that thought they were doing it thought it was a meaningful experience. And there are ways to talk about how to make it more meaningful and all that. So the coffee thing intrigues me. So you're guaranteed a cup of coffee and a warm handshake. And the way coffee costs money. Somebody has to pay for the farmer and ship. And so there's a thing up there. It says it doesn't really say put your money here, but there's always money in it. Whoever puts it up there is always smart enough to put something in it. So this is for money. But nobody stands there looking over your shoulder like, I said, you didn't put any money in. and there's nobody like that. But it's there, but we don't care how much money you made last week, what your economic situation is, you get a cup of coffee. If you want one. If you don't want one. Now, if you want something fancy or something else, well, that's your problem. But coffee's here. And it's free, but it has to be paid for somehow. And our social events. We had a potluck at our house a couple of months ago. That's a good structure. That's a good social structure for allowing anybody of any economic status to come to. Because if you show up, you get food. And you kind of ought to bring something. And we know here, this is not an ecologically, economically, this is not an economically homogeneous group. We have different incomes, different capacities. Some people really need to bring a pretty big plate of food. And we expect that everybody brings something. So that kind of social structure builds group cohesion. And a couple of weeks ago, Clemson said we want to have more social events here. That's fine, but let's make sure that they're economically neutral. Like, I know sometimes after lunch some people go down to lunch at Natty Green's. But not everybody here can afford to go to Natty Green's. I thought of, what if we added as a member benefit, if you're a member of this church, you get to join us all one time at Natty Green's, and the church pays the bill. And then, when we build the church budget, we figure out how to get enough money so that on a given Sunday, everybody can go to Natty Green's and not feel self-conscious about it. Maybe yes, maybe no. The other thing is about, now I'm on the second point on social structures, we need to practice affirming social structures. There's a kind of a wind blowing around today that says all structures are bad. Just let me do what I want to do. I'm sorry. One of the things I've tried to do personally is I've tried to thank police officers. Whenever I see them out there, especially like at the Fun Fourth, they're out there, whatever they're doing. When I walk past them, I always try to, if I catch their eye, I say, hey, thanks for being here today. Because who thanks the policeman? What would it mean if, I know when people go vote, you get that little thing that says, I voted. And I'm a big thing on voting. Please vote. Don't forget the primary coming up on October the 10th and the city election in November. But what if we changed our relationship to taxes? What if we started to say, I paid my taxes? And we all wore a little button, so and let's quit bitching about taxes. If you don't like the structure of the taxes, that's a different question. Let's have that conversation. But if you want to drive on roads and have the policeman come to your house and whatever else, we got to have taxes. And we got to be proud of the fact that we pay our taxes, or nothing's going to happen. And as a demonstration of that, let's take seriously funding this church. Because if you want to come here, and I want to come here, it takes money. It takes money to run this church. Structures have overhead, and you got to pay the overhead of the structure. I'm going to make two real practical suggestions about finances for this church. Number one, make sure every Sunday everybody touches the collection plate. And get a nice looking collection plate that doesn't look like plastic leftover. But here's the thing, gang.
You want the whole plate?
No, something your mother made or something. But everybody here, in my opinion, every Sunday, everybody here needs to touch the collection plate. Just to say, I know I'm part of the financial structure of this church. Whether you put anything in it or not, touch the plate. We stand at the end and we all hold hands. We all sing Spirit of Life together. You should touch the plate. And more particularly, put something in it. Now, I do this. Every week, the first time I go shopping and get change, I fold the dollar in half. And this will go in the collection plate on Sunday. And every single week, I spend some money and I get some change. And this is my collection. And every day that I get money out of my wallet, I see the folded bill. And I think, I'm okay for Sunday. And that way I know I've got something to put in the plate. And if you don't think you can do $1 a week, then do it once a month. And the other little practice I have is shiny coins. You know, every year the government makes new money. So there's 2017 pennies. Starting about February, I start looking for the shiny pennies. I look at the date. Is this the New Year penny? And the first couple of pennies I put in front of my Indian gods that I have. I have an Indian god Ganesh, and I have Lakshmi. Ganesh is the god that takes care of new ventures. If you want to start something new, you go talk to Ganesh. And Lakshmi is the one who takes care of wealth. If you want to be wealthy, you talk to Lakshmi. So the first shiny coins I get go to them. And then all year long I see,
Are they happy?
well, that's another story, but yes. Well, so then we need to start among ourselves to start to look and talk about structures and talk about how structures are helping and hurting people, and experiment internally. I got a couple of last kind of practical things, and I want to wind this up. The key is think structure and affirm structure. But that means part of it is we have to also learn how to see through the eyes of the economically disadvantaged. One of the rules of thumb I've had to myself is I try to make sure that I have some friends who have less than half of my income, an income less than half of mine, and I have some friends that have income more than mine. And that way I've got some friends to kind of think about. I have a friend in India. He and his wife, their total work, their life work, was sitting on the side of the road selling vegetables. They would go in the morning and buy a bushel of apples, and then they'd sit there selling onesie apples. Let me tell you, there's not much markup in apples. But periodically, when I go to India, I try to go over to their house, have lunch with them. It's quite a different experience, but it makes sure that I'm always thinking through their eyes also. And as I said, watch out within our own structures. And then we as a congregation need to think about how we as a congregation speak as a congregation. What is the voice of this congregation? Because, like I said, part of the question today is how does a group of people become a group and then have an entity as a group? That's a big trick. And we don't know that as a society, really. What we have is, we know how to have a boss come up with an idea and hire a bunch of people. And then the boss says what we're going to do. But we don't have a good model for how a group of people come together out of their own free will and then act as a group. So that's the next kind of a challenge. And practice within our own selves structural change. And every now and again, you have to say no to a structure. My example of that is when Elaine and I were square dancing for a while. We square danced for a while. And the square dance group was not the most liberal group of people in the universe, but all wonderful souls. And we went there to square dance, and we had a good time. And the square dance caller kind of ruled the roost. And one night, the square dance caller told a joke that was racially, grossly insensitive. And I went up to him, I looked him straight in the eye. I said, "Curtis, you tell one more joke like that, and you will never see my face again in this group." And you know, there were no more racial jokes told in that group. Now, they may have done something after I was gone, but when I was there, and you got to stop that kind of stuff. You can't always just go with the flow. But we are in a time of building structures that meet sociological injustice. And I look forward to a fun time working on structures.